Going to unpack the clinical realities and acute interventions for heat-related illnesses in our rapidly warming world. Whether you are a frontline healthcare provider, a community organizer, or honestly, just someone trying to stay safe this summer, the information we're covering is absolutely critical. We're going to break down the exact science of what happens to the human body under extreme thermal stress, and more importantly, how to intervene before it's too late. To understand the sheer life-or-death urgency of this topic, look no further than this staggering statistic. We're seeing an 85% surge in heat-related mortality among those over age 65 from the 1990s compared to this past decade. 85%! This isn't some theoretical problem for the future. It's a present-day clinical emergency that is dramatically driving up the human cost of rising temperatures.
So here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with the climate heat hazard, move into the thermoregulation teeter-totter, and then cover diagnosing acute heat stroke. After that, we'll hit the golden 30 minutes, vulnerability and hidden hazards, and finally wrap up with a proactive heat plan.
Okay, part 1, the climate heat hazard. Let's dive into the unprecedented environmental hazard that's driving these medical emergencies in the first place.
You see, we're dealing with a very direct cause and effect here. On one side, the climate hazard. 2023, it was the warmest year ever recorded by NASA. Literally every single month from June to December set a new global high-temperature record. And get this, out of 175 years of record-keeping, the 10 warmest years have all happened in just the last decade. And directly tied to that rising thermometer is the human cost, that terrifying 85% mortality curve we just talked about. It's a tragic correlation playing out right now in our clinics and emergency rooms.
Moving right along to part 2, the thermoregulation teeter-totter. Balance versus overload. How exactly does all that ambient heat outside trigger a medical collapse inside?
Well, think of your body like a teeter-totter. On the left side, your cooling mechanisms are working overtime. Sweating, vasodilation, which is just your blood vessels expanding, and behavioral things like seeking out shade. They are constantly fighting to maintain a perfect core temperature of 37 degrees Celsius or 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. But on the right side, you've got the accumulating load. This is the heavy weight of the environment around you, your physical exertion, and your baseline physical condition. Acute heat illness happens the exact moment that accumulating load just gets too heavy, completely overwhelming your body's defenses and tipping the teeter-totter.
When that teeter-totter tips, patients fall somewhere on this spectrum. It perfectly illustrates how the threat progresses. A patient might go from a mild illness right into heat exhaustion where they feel profoundly fatigued and nauseous, but, and this is key, their mental state is still normal. But what happens on the far right of the spectrum? That's heat stroke. Notice the stark contrast here between classic heat stroke, which usually hits older individuals and presents with hot, dry skin, versus exertional heat stroke. That one typically hits otherwise healthy people doing extreme exercise, and surprisingly, they're often still sweating. So what's the massive differentiator that pushes both of these into the ultimate red zone? Altered abnormal mental status.
Which brings us to part 3, diagnosing acute heat stroke. Recognizing when a patient has crossed the line from just being exhausted into full-blown severe heat stroke is an absolute matter of life or death.
Getting this diagnosis right hinges on a 3-part Venn diagram. We call it the heat stroke triad. A confirmed diagnosis needs 3 things happening all at once. Number 1, hyperthermia. Number 2, recent exposure to hot weather or heavy exertion. And number 3, the real linchpin here, neurologic abnormalities. This can be anything from a patient being a little confused or dizzy, all the way to extreme presentations like full-blown seizures or sphincter incontinence. If this entire triad is present, it's a fast track to multi-system organ failure and death.
But here's the really tricky part for healthcare providers. These extreme symptoms, they mimic a lot of other crises. A patient coming in with a high fever and an altered mental state could easily have something else entirely. That's why you have to immediately check the core body temperature to definitively rule out other diagnoses. We're talking sepsis, ischemic or hemorrhagic strokes, toxicologic emergencies, or endocrinologic emergencies. You absolutely have to know what you're fighting before you start the clock.
Part 4, the golden 30 minutes, immediate clinical action. Once that diagnosis of heat stroke is locked in, you are officially on the clinical battlefield. This is a strict, fast-paced timeline, and the tension here is incredible. At T-0, you've got to triage and stabilize the ABCs, airway, breathing, and circulation, while getting continuous core temperature monitoring going.
From there, you have exactly 5 minutes to reach T+5, where you initiate rapid cooling. The gold standard, cold water or ice water immersion. And why the massive rush? Because your absolute non-negotiable goal is T+30, the target threshold. By minute 30, you have to get that core temperature down to between 38 and 39 degrees Celsius to prevent major organ damage and death. Literally every single minute counts here.
While you're fighting that clock, it's vital to know your life-saving do's versus your critical don'ts. For heat exhaustion, we do remove them from the heat, start evaporative cooling, and rehydrate. Simple enough. For heat stroke, we do use benzodiazepines to control shivering during cooling, because shivering just generates more heat, right? But look at the don't column. This is what we call the antipyretic trap. You must never, ever use standard fever medications, antipyretics, for heat stroke. The mechanism of harm is severe here. These meds do absolutely nothing for environmental hyperthermia, and even worse, they actively aggravate coagulopathy and end organ damage. Giving a fever pill to a heat stroke victim is quite literally adding fuel to the fire. Don't do it.
Okay, part 5, vulnerability and hidden hazards. Let's zoom back out from the intensity of the ER and ask, who's actually ending up in these beds in the first place?
The patient's vulnerability isn't just about their biology. It's more like a giant puzzle of intersecting failures. Right in the center, yes, you have individual biological factors, like extremes of age, chronic diseases, or cognitive impairments. But wrap that in a layer of occupational and social hazards. Maybe they do extreme physical labor, or they're unhoused. And wrapping all of that is the systemic environmental layer. Our sources point out that urban heat islands, those densely built areas with hardly any green space, can run 1 to 7 degrees Fahrenheit hotter. Plus, historically racist zoning practices like redlining disproportionately trap low-income communities inside these hotter concrete-heavy zones, completely lowering their threshold for heat illness.
To put just the occupational hazard into perspective, listen to this CDC data. Crop workers are dying from heat stroke at a rate nearly 20 times that of overall U.S. civilian workers. 20 times! That is a massive occupational load. And crazily enough, there is currently no dedicated U.S. federal standard for occupational heat exposure, meaning it's up to states like California and Washington to mandate even the most basic water and shade breaks.
And here's a curveball. Patients might unknowingly be chemically sabotaged by their very own medicine cabinets. Everyday prescriptions can completely mess with the body's natural thermal regulation. Take anticholinergics. They decrease sweat production. Remember the teeter-totter? If you can't sweat, you can't cool. Antipsychotics interfere with how the brain regulates temperature. Diuretics drive dehydration. And even over-the-counter weight loss supplements can crank up metabolic heat production. It's a perfect storm of pharmacological sabotage hiding right in plain sight.
Finally, part 6, the proactive heat plan. Knowing all this danger, what do we actually do about it? We have to equip ourselves with a systemic strategy. Our path forward breaks down into 3 simple steps. Step 1, preseason. Identify your vulnerable patients early and counsel them on checking the heat index, limiting exposure, and staying hydrated. Step 2, in-season. Plan safe, cool living spaces and map out local cooling centers. But huge caveat here, standard fans actually become dangerous once ambient temperatures cross 37 degrees Celsius or 98 degrees Fahrenheit. At that point, blowing hot air is literally like sitting in a convection oven. And step 3, systemic action. We need to vigorously advocate for worker protections like guaranteed shade and water breaks and push for rapid greenhouse gas emission reductions to prevent this from getting even worse.
To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a real question to think about. Is your clinic, your community, and your own home fully prepared for the medical realities of our next record-breaking summer? Because as we've seen today, the heat isn't just a minor discomfort, it's a profound clinical challenge. It tips our bodies teeter-totter, it demands a flawless 30-minute emergency response, and thank you so much for joining me to break down this crucial topic. Take this knowledge, share it, and most importantly, use it to stay safe out there.